Good morning, welcome back to the Dudley book. Bit of a change of pace for me today. I'm going to be talking about a particularly brutal crime that occurred in a pub up in Dudley town centre 99 years ago. Now remember, I'm not going to be going into any of the particularly gory details regarding the crime scene and the post-mortem and the police surgeon's report, unlike some YouTube channels. But remember, I am still going to be talking about a particularly brutal and violent crime, so keep that in mind. Okay, this is the Malt Shovel as it is today. Built pre-1820 and originally called the Duke of Wellington. It was originally, and indeed back in the 1920s, part of a terrace that continued along that way. We're putting a picture up later on that clearly shows the rest of the terrace. Now at the time, it was number 45 and 46 with a partition down the middle, so there were two separate dwellings, but in fact the Bayliss family lived in both. The pub, or the bar on the bottom right, which is a homebrew bar, was owned and run by Ada Bayliss, and they'd got 3 daughters and a son, James Bayliss, who was 14 at the time. Ada had also got another son from an earlier marriage. Her first husband had died, called Joseph Flavel, and he shared a room with James up on the top left there. I'll pop up a little diagram to show you which part of the family lived where. Okay, I'm now in the beer garden of the Malt Shovel. This would of course originally been the backyard. The extension on that side did exist then, though it's been modernised. The extension on the left hand side, as I'm looking at it, didn't actually exist. Bear in mind it was a homebrew house, so you would have all your brewing kind of annexes and things out here as well. So on Friday 5th of March 1926 in the evening, Joseph Flavel was outside at the back here chopping wood, and then once he'd finished that chore, he disappeared into the town. James Bayliss went into the bar at about 10 to 10 and kissed his mum goodnight and retired to bed. Joe didn't turn back up until about 11:30 that night. Mind you, he wasn't drunk, and he was warned about his bad timekeeping and told if he didn't improve he was going to be out. He then gave his mum his £1 board money for the week, because he worked as a crane driver at Horsley Engineering Works. So the next morning, Saturday 6th of the 3rd, Joseph Flavel came downstairs at about 7:30. In the living room was Mrs. Tranter. She was an aunt of Ada, and she noticed that he was in his best clothes, and she asked him why, and he said he wasn't going to go to work, he was going out. Then he came out here, out to the backyard, and shouted up to his mum to lend him £10, which was a lot of money back, 100 years ago. Of course she refused, and then he said cryptically, "If you don't give me the money, I'll give myself up." And then he promptly left. Mrs. Tranter, the aunt, went to wake James at about 7:45, and she came back downstairs looking very pale and distressed, and told everybody not to go up there. Now one of the daughters still did actually go up. Obviously the police were called and the doctor arrived at 8:30. And he found James still lying in bed, dead. The axe was actually still in the bedroom. I said I'm not going to go into all the gory details. The doctor stated he'd probably been dead about 4 hours, and he estimated there were 3 blows with the axe. Now obviously after that there was no sign of Joseph, and then later that night at about 9:30 in Birmingham, a place called Union Passage, PC Pettit was approached by a bloke who said to him, I'm Joseph Flavel and I'm wanted in Dudley, and he gave over ID. And he actually said at the time, I have lost 3 sisters and a mother, but I had cause to do it. And he was in a very nervous condition. So obviously they got in touch with Dudley Police and Detective Constable Malta, who actually knew Joseph, went over to Birmingham. He was informed actually at 10 to 10. And he went over there and charged Joseph with willful murder. And Joseph then said he never had any pain. I did it while he was asleep, after it got light. James's funeral was held on the 11th of March 1926 and started off at the Malt Shovel pub. Coffin left the house at 2:30 in the afternoon and went along Tower Street, up what was then Downing Street, now called the Broadway, then turned right and followed the High Street all the way up from Bottom Church to Top Church. Thousands of people lined the route. 6 of his schoolmates actually carried the coffin from the house and then into Top Church. His mum Ada, unfortunately, was still far too grief-stricken to actually attend. There were over 60 floral tributes to James. During the service at Top Church, there was no music or hymns used during the service, and it was led by Reverend Canon Phelps. After the service, the coffin was put back in the hearse and then continued down to what was then called the Borough Cemetery, now called Queen's Cross, which is where I am actually sitting now. This was the Magistrates' Court, and back in the day was also what was called the Police Court, and the old police station was just round the corner there. Now, after the crime and the arrest, Joseph Flavel appeared here for a committal hearing on the 15th of March 1926. He pleaded not guilty and was remanded to Winson Green on what was termed committed for trial on a coroner's warrant. The trial itself only lasted a day. It was on the 12th of the 6th, 1926 at Worcester Assizes. Mr Justice Avers was presiding. Prosecution was led by the Honourable Geoffrey Lawson, KC, and the defendant, a very well-known defendant, barrister at the time, was Sir Edward Marshall Hall, KC. Joseph entered a plea of not guilty, and all the way through the trial he never showed any emotion other than when his mother appeared in the room. Now, during the trial, the court heard a lot of evidence about Joseph's behaviour. They were saying that once he actually lost his temperance, began swinging a table around in the bar. He set fire to his bedroom when he was 10. In the last 6 or 7 years, he'd had 10 different jobs. And he'd actually had a consultation with what was then termed a brain specialist quite some time before, 16 or 17 years before the trial. Apparently he would also, when he got annoyed and frustrated, he would often bite a towel, and more than once said he just wished he could do away with himself, and he'd hold his head in his hands and all of this. Once he actually told his mom that he'd been brought home in an ambulance with poisoned feet. Completely untrue, of course. And on another occasion, he put a cat in the oven. As I said, the trial only lasted one day. Now obviously the defence was pushing for guilty by reason of insanity. And there was, or there had been, a Royal Commission looking at guilt via insanity. But, as the judge pointed out, changes to the law regarding that would have to be dealt with by a commission, not by the court as it was now in this particular trial. So all the evidence was heard and the judge pronounced the accused guilty. At 6:15 that evening, the judge re-entered and pronounced a sentence of death on Joseph. And Joseph's only reaction was to say, "Thank you, sir." Just the one day. Joseph's appeal was held on the 17th of the 7th, 1926, at the Court of Criminal Appeal. 3 judges, Sankey, Roche and Swift, sat, and Joseph remained seated throughout between 2 warders. It was pointed out that a petition had been lodged at the Home Office that contained 18,296 signatures and was apparently almost a mile long. Sir Edward Marshall, who defended Joseph in the trial, took charge again, and he was pushing for the verdict to be changed from guilty to guilty but insane. And he pointed out that Joseph's father had died of epilepsy. 8 of his family had either died in asylums or been in asylums at some point. And he also said that he reckons the insanity angle, as it were, hadn't been given enough attention in the trial. However, the appeal court judges stated that, as had been said before, any changes regarding guilty but insane would have to be dealt with by a Royal Commission and not for the appeal court. And so the appeal was turned down. Joseph Flavel remained silent throughout and walked out slowly once the decision had been announced. So, Joseph never really gave a proper explanation as to why he'd done it, other than he deserved it. So obviously we had the trial, he was found guilty, the appeal failed, but then on the 24th of the 7th, 1926, it was suddenly announced that the death sentence had been commuted to penal servitude for life. His mum Ada wrote a letter to the local paper, the Dudley Herald, and said, best thanks to all who had signed the petition. That was 18,296 people. And also said, it's been great comfort to me as my son was not responsible for his actions. Here's a question. In similar circumstances, would you have that kind of an opinion? Okay, I'm now actually at James's grave. He's buried with his mum and I'm assuming his dad. And what I'll do is I'll get a closer shot for you of the inscriptions because of the weathering of the stone and the staining, it's not particularly legible from any more than a couple of feet away. Here we are, in loving memory of Ada Ann, beloved wife of Thomas Bayliss, who passed away August the 8th, 1927. Ada, that is. So that means, unfortunately, she didn't survive her son James by very long, 52 when she died. And further down, I hope it's going to be able to pick up on this. Also of James Thomas, their son, who fell asleep March the 6th, 1926, aged 14 years. And I think that says, "My not good night, but in some brighter clime, good morning." So, as I said, I think James, his mum and his dad are all buried here. And here's a longer shot of their grave. So there you have the story of Joseph Flavel, who was 24 at the time of the crime, and how he murdered his half-brother, James Bayliss. I don't know what happened to Joseph after he was imprisoned. I did read somewhere that he was eventually paroled, but I don't have any details on that. I did find a possible notification of death of a Joseph Flavel, but I wasn't sure it was the right bloke, so I didn't really delve into it. Now, Joseph, should he have been found guilty by reason of insanity? Up to you, isn't it? Personally, I don't think he was insane. I think he was just a nasty piece of work who knew exactly what he was doing. But obviously that's just my personal opinion. I always have an opinion on what should have happened to him, but I'm not going to open that can of worms on YouTube. Also, before we finish, big thanks to the landlady of the Malt Shovel, Michelle, for allowing me to film on the premises. Hope you found it interesting. Please don't have nightmares. And don't forget, keep out the Osh Road.